This should be an interesting video. When and why did Pink Floyd fall apart? Now, I know this one is an absolute rabbit hole of opinions, facts, and conflicting stories, and let me know yours in the comments down below. I'm not going to talk a massive amount about their early Syd Barrett days in this one, partly because it would take about a week to go through it all, and partly because I've covered some of it in my other videos on this channel. Instead, I'm going to focus primarily on two albums, The Wall and The Final Cut, and what was happening at the time to see if we can pinpoint the moment Pink Floyd fell apart. So, Roger Waters and David Gilmour. It's a feud that feels as old as time, but they weren't always at odds. When David Gilmour joined Pink Floyd in 1968, there was friendship and mutual respect there. Roger Waters is often touted as Pink Floyd's creative visionary after Syd Barrett left, their primary songwriter and often the vision behind their music. But this doesn't really give credit to the rest of the band. Rick Wright, for example, had some really important contributions to their early work, and I think he goes really underappreciated. After Syd Barrett's departure, Waters contributed a lot of lyrics, but the crafting of the finished products was still a collaborative effort between all the members of Pink Floyd. Gilmour was responsible for a big chunk of Pink Floyd's arrangements and progressions, and of course, guitar solos. It wasn't really until Dark Side of the Moon that Waters started to tighten his grip on the creative processes behind the band. And from there, he seemed to appoint himself as the main songwriter, leaving little room for input from his bandmates. It was all about his vision, and unsurprisingly, this started to brew resentment within the band. David Gilmour once said this about the recording process of Dark Side of the Moon. "There's creative tension, and there's total egocentric, megalomaniacal tension, if you like." By the time they did Animals in 1977, Waters composed all the songs, apart from Dogs, which was co-written with Gilmour. It was the first album not to include songwriting credits for Rick Wright. And looking back, the writing was on the wall. Sorry, I couldn't resist that pun. But really, I think The Wall is where things really started coming to a head. Before they even started, things had been building up. Despite their success, the band were having severe financial problems. And during the Animals recording and tour, Waters was increasingly controlling and intense over the themes and direction of the music, leaving his bandmates feeling sidelined. They were becoming disconnected from each other, often spending time alone and silently seething. Waters began to feel increasingly isolated from both his bandmates and the crowd when on stage. And then the infamous moment came. Roger Waters spat in the face of a fan during a show. I won't go too deep into the details of the incident in this video, but all that information is on the internet if you want to find it.
I thought about it deeply and lost quite a lot of sleep. And during that loss of sleep, I thought, what a great theatrical idea it would be to do a rock and roll concert and to physically build a wall across the front of the stage while the concert's going on, just to demonstrate how much alienation there is potential for in that. And then the record came after that.
For all their brilliance, Pink Floyd were always a bit of a fragile band. There was a delicate balance between Waters' songwriting and Gilmour's musicianship. And when this balance was disrupted, the chemistry that created their greatest work was the same thing that would eventually destroy them. And nowhere is that more obvious than in the leap between The Wall and The Final Cut. These two albums might only be a few years apart, but they might as well have come from two different bands. And maybe they did. If there is a single point where the band fell apart, it's somewhere between these two albums. Roger Waters had a vision, a huge one. It's a conceptual rock opera exploring Waters' increasing disillusion with fame, touring and disconnection. He was sick of the whole machine, the crowds, the distance, the superficiality of the rock star lifestyle. It follows the protagonist, Pink, who mirrors Roger's real-life experience of losing his own father to the war. He also fed his feelings of grief, loss, and resentment of the war into that album. And you can hear that isolation all over the tracklist. 26 songs, that's huge. It was, arguably, Roger Waters at his creative peak. It was also Roger Waters at his most controlling, though. And I think this is where Pink Floyd started to turn more into the Roger Waters show. But David Gilmour still managed to put his fingerprints on the album. In fact, he felt he needed to. He wasn't convinced by the early material. He gave us all a cassette of the whole thing, and I couldn't listen to it. It was too depressing and too boring in lots of places. But I liked the basic idea. We eventually agreed to do it, but we had to chuck out a lot of stuff. Rewrite a lot of things, and put a lot of new bits in, throw a lot of old bits out. Gilmour's touches are everywhere, from the iconic solo in Comfortably Numb to the delicate guitar work in Hey You. Even though Waters was writing the lyrics and directing the vision, Gilmour's musicality was essential in keeping it grounded and listenable. Nick Mason played drums on most of the tracks, though even he admitted he often felt like an outsider in the process. And Rick Wright didn't even make it to the end. After clashing repeatedly with Waters, Wright was fired during the recording sessions. He was then rehired as a session musician for the tour, not as a band member. And there's a bit of a legend that he was the only one to make any profit from that tour because he was a session musician. He was salaried. Everyone else lost money because of how massively expensive the show was to produce. Whether or not that's actually true, I'm not so sure. But the firing of Wright is often seen as the moment where the classic lineup effectively ended. I mean, they still performed together, but the balance of power had shifted permanently. Roger's influence over the band was undeniable. But is it the moment the band fell apart? I'd say it was more like when the cracks became a fault line. In the end, The Wall was a critical and commercial triumph. It spawned massive hit singles, and a major tour, and also eventually a film. But for some people, it marks the start of the end for Pink Floyd. But it's not over just yet. The final cut came out in 1983, and to this day, it remains one of the most polarising entries in the Pink Floyd catalogue. Many people consider it a Roger Waters solo record, with Gilmour as a sort of reluctant guest. Wright was completely absent. Mason's contributions were minimal. Gilmour didn't write any music for it. Waters wrote everything. The songs, the concept, the lyrics, and even produced the album. The final cut was actually originally planned to be a soundtrack album for the Wall film, but in the end, they ended up using mostly songs from that album, and the final cut became its own full album. Roger Waters was frustrated with the Thatcher administration in the UK and the invasion of the Falklands. So Waters changed the album and used it as an opportunity to explore themes of loss, war, and betrayal. But the tension behind the scenes was at breaking point. Gilmour and Waters were constantly at odds, with Waters clinging to control and Gilmour frustrated at his lack of involvement. Waters felt like the band had checked out. Neither man was happy. By the end of it, Waters walked away from Pink Floyd altogether, publicly declaring the band was finished. Only it wasn't. Now for me, if you had to absolutely pinpoint one moment where the band fell apart, it's here. Partly because, well, obviously half the band have left at this point, and partly because after this, well, they really did stop being Pink Floyd. Despite Roger's certainty the band couldn't continue without him, it did, for nearly 10 years. Waters, as we all know, was furious, and that's when the feud really dives down into its nastiest parts. Long story short, Waters tried and failed to sue Gilmour and Mason so they couldn't use the Pink Floyd name. They were allowed to continue and did so. But for many people, it just wasn't Pink Floyd. It was now a Gilmour solo project with the name Pink Floyd. Ironically, the tables had turned, and Waters couldn't stand it. What followed was decades of bitter spats, with both sides firing shots and sometimes trying to take them back. And as for the fans, well, if you're a fan, you know. Some say the Gilmour era was a return to their early sound, and the shows were fantastic, but others say they completely lost their lyrical edge without Roger Waters. And honestly, I think it comes down to whether you're a bigger Gilmour fan or Waters fan. And I'm sure you're all going to go at it in the comment section, and I'm very excited to see that. And do you know about the Pink Floyd album that was abandoned and buried for being too weird? That one is fascinating. You can watch it over here next.